everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn, Exploring the Night Sky. We are delighted to welcome Shawn Laatsch today. Shawn is the director of the Versant Power Astronomy Center at the University of Maine, and he's here with us to talk about the center's work, give us a bit of an introduction to astronomy, and suggest what we should look for in the night sky this summer. My name is Kathleen Neal. I am the Director of Policy and Partnerships at Maine Conservation Voters and Maine Conservation Alliance. Our organizations represent more than 8,500 members and supporters dedicated to protecting Maine's environment and our democracy. MCA does that through education, collaboration, and advocacy, and MCV by influencing public policy, holding politicians accountable, and winning elections. A few technical notes for today. We will hear from Shawn and then tackle questions in the Q&A at the end. You don't have to wait though. You can send your questions to me through the chat whenever they occur to you. I will compile them and ask them directly during the Q&A. If you have any technical difficulties, you can message Will Sedlak through the chat and he will help you out. This event is being recorded and the video will be posted on our website later this afternoon, where you can also find recordings of all of our previous Lunch and Learns. Thank you all for joining us. And Shawn, I will turn it over to you.
All right, well, thank you. I'm gonna see if I can get my screen share going here. And then we will get started.
Looks perfect.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about exploring the night sky, and I really like to, talk about Maine's wondrous night sky in the regard that Maine really has some incredible dark skies, some of the darkest on the eastern seaboard, and there's even an area in our state that I'll talk about a little bit later that's been designated a dark sky preserve, if you will. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about that and how to get started in stargazing. Things of that nature. So to begin with, as mentioned, I'm Shawn Laatsch. I'm the director of the Versant Power Astronomy Center, which is up here at the University of Maine. Our building is currently open for public programs. We do have some COVID limitations, but I'm hoping with some of the news I saw yesterday that we'll be able to do more. But currently we do public programs on Friday nights at 7 o'clock, Sunday afternoons at 2, and then of course a variety of matinees and other things as well, depending on the season. If you've not been up here to the facility at the University of Maine, we host the largest and most technologically advanced planetarium in the state of Maine. We're a 10-meter dome with 50 seats, and we have digital projection. We can recreate the night sky in the planetarium like traditional planetariums, but we also can show a whole variety of full dome content, which means that we can do astronomy and many other sciences. In fact, we've covered things like earth and environmental science, marine science, engineering, and a whole variety of other topics in our presentations. We have a lobby area that has some interactive exhibits where you can weigh yourself on the different planets in the solar system. We also have the University of Maine's first payload package that flew in space on the International Space Station from a couple years back, and some other interactives, a classroom area for doing events and hands-on activities as well. So we hope sometime that you'll be able to come and check us out and visit with us here at the planetarium. Well, tonight, since we're going to be talking about, or today, I should say, since we're going to be talking about stargazing, I always like to start with some basic things that can help if you want to begin stargazing. There are some things you might want to take with you. And probably the key thing really is a red flashlight. Now, red light allows your night vision, you to keep your night vision, because at night, the pupils of your eye dilate to let the light in. And if you turn on a bright white light, you'll notice it's uncomfortable, but also it'll take a while to readjust. And since in astronomy, we're typically looking at sort of faint things, you do want to keep your night vision as best you can. So just having a flashlight with either a red filter, you can even stretch an old red balloon over the top, or a red piece of cellophane, or a red tissue paper will work pretty well. It's helpful to have a star chart. That will help you find your way around the sky. I'll show you a couple sources where you can get these. There are places that you can get them online free, in fact, but you can also purchase them and things like that. Notebook, if you want to record your observations. At this time of year, you definitely probably will want some insect repellent, especially given that it is black fly season. And once you start sort of, as I call it, crawling, which is finding the constellations and finding things in the night sky with your unaided eye, then you might want to start to walk. The next step is sort of binoculars. That's sort of the walking step, if you will, and a telescope is running. So that's kind of the way I talk about these objects. So telescopes and binoculars and telescopes will give you a closer view, but you really need to know the basic constellations to be able to find things. So starting off with constellations is really a key thing. There are a number of different resources that you can use to learn about the night sky. I'm very traditional. I still love books as my primary method. These are some of the ones from my childhood. Find the Constellations and the Stars by H.A. Ray. For those of you who remember Curious George from back in the day, that was, that's the same author from Curious George, and those are some really nice books. Find the Constellations geared for really young children. The Stars sort of for middle and early high school. And then if you're looking for something more for the adult side, Sky Guide, of course, Turn Left at Orion and Night Watch are really great. These two in particular will get into some of the basics of binoculars and telescopes once you've done the basic finding of the constellations, if you will. And then there are numerous websites. I've listed a few of my favorites here. One is heavens-above.com. From that website, you can put in your location. You can generate star charts that you can print out and take out with you when you're looking at the night sky. It also will give you passes for satellites like the International Space Station, the Hubble Space Telescope, and numerous others when they pass overhead, and lots of other information. It's a free website. You can register if you want. They don't spam you or anything like that, but registering will keep your observing location so that every time you go back to the site, it'll automatically be there. But it's a really great site for a variety of astronomical bits of information for viewing the sky, if you will. Earth Sky is another one that has daily information about the night sky. And there's even, of course, a website, or the website, I should say, but there's also a NPR sometimes has them on as well. They have sort of the, Deborah Bird does their presentations. Sky and Telescope and Astronomy are amateur astronomer magazines, but they also have websites that have a whole variety of information about stargazing, the night sky, and what's currently up in the sky, if you like. Alrighty, so those are a few resources, and I know I went through them fast, but I can always get a list, to Will or Kathleen to get posted later on too for you. I'm going to stop sharing this for a moment, and I'm going to switch gears here now to actually showing you the night sky. And we're going to do so using a program called Stellarium. All right, so hopefully you can now see my screen again.
That looks good, Shawn.
Okay, good, great. Thanks for confirming that with me. So I have set up our sky using a program called Stellarium, and Stellarium is a free program. You can just find it at stellarium.org. It's available for Windows, Mac, tablets, things like that. But it's a desktop planetarium program that can help you find your way around the sky a bit. And that's what we're looking at right now. So I've set up our sky here for tonight at about 8:55 in the evening, which is basically still in the very edge of evening twilight, if you will. It really is about a good hour and a half after the sun goes down before it gets completely dark. But right now, this week in particular has been a really good week to look for the planet Mercury. And tonight, if you go outside, again, as soon as it gets dark, you have basically Mercury, the moon, and Mars in a nice spaced out line, if you will. Last night, the moon was actually very close to Mercury in the night sky. And Mercury is sometimes called the elusive planet because it never gets very high above our horizon. Mercury and Venus both orbit interior to the Earth's orbit. So you either need to look for them either right away after sunset or early in the morning prior to sunrise, depending on where they are in their orbit compared to us. Now, Venus also is visible. In fact, if you would a little bit earlier, you might have caught Venus, but Venus will be getting better as the month progresses. So I'd say start looking for Venus as well. It will set probably about 10 minutes ago. Venus is the fourth brightest thing you'll see or third brightest thing you'll see in your sky, excuse me, after the sun and moon. So it's exceptionally bright and hard to miss, but it's just re-emerging from behind the sun right now. So again, over the next few weeks, that's going to get higher into the sky. But you want to look towards the west, southwest. You want a good horizon without too many buildings or trees. And again, Mercury, Venus, and Mars there. Mars, of course, has been in the news a bit because of the Perseverance rover and the Ingenuity, the little helicopter that's been doing some powered flights on Mars. But the moon right now going to be a great frame from those. Just want to show you a quick thing. Of course, we had a new moon on Tuesday, but which means that we don't see the moon, and then of course each day. But I'm just going to go ahead, for instance, if I was to go ahead a day in time, there you saw me go ahead one day, and you'll see that tomorrow night the moon is going to be pretty close to Mars. And if we were to continue going, for instance, each day you're going to see that moon change a little bit in its position, but also, of course, its phase. All right. Now, if you do have a pair of binoculars, you can zoom in on the moon a bit, and you'll notice some nice mountains, valleys, and craters on the surface of the moon. And really, this is a good time the next couple of days to see something called Earthshine, where we see a little bit of light reflecting off of our oceans onto the moon and lighting up that dark portion of the moon. And again, we see the moon because it's reflecting sunlight. Where it is determines how much of that half-lit side we see, you might say. But this gives you a little bit of an idea of some stuff that's visible as soon as it gets dark. Well, let me put time into motion here, and I want to do so because we do actually want to go until it is really dark out. So we're going to do that a little bit. I'm going to take you, here we are about roughly 9:30 in the evening. And I'm going to switch our direction a bit here over to the north. I'll pull back just a little bit here. And in the north, we're going to start off with probably one of the most familiar patterns in the night sky, which is the Big Dipper. These 7 stars right through here form the pattern. It looks a lot like a pot or pan that you might have on a stove at home. 4 stars mark the bowl, 3 mark the handle. It's been called the Big Dipper, of course, the drinking gourd, the wagon, the plow, even the celestial bureaucrat, lots of different names. To me, I always see it like a pot or pan. And at this time of year, if you're facing north, it sort of looks like it's pouring stuff out, like you were tipping something out. And if you follow these first 2 stars, their names are Dubhe and Merrick, out the open end, it will point you to this star right here, which is not a very bright star, but happens to be what some folks think is the most important star in the night sky, and that is the North Star. In fact, of the 50 brightest in the sky, it is 43rd on the list, Polaris or the North Star. And it is at the end of the handle of the Little Dipper. In fact, I'll zoom in a little bit to make it easier to see, but the Little Dipper is fainter, and unless you have a nice dark sky, will be challenging to spot. There is that Little Dipper. In fact, I can draw it in. There we have that Little Dipper, which the handle sort of bent the opposite way. It looks a bit like a spoon or a ladle. The Big Dipper looks more like a pot or pan, but really the full name of that group is Ursa Major, the Great Bears. These 4 stars mark the body. 3 fainter ones out in front are the head. The front legs come down like this. The hind legs curl around here, and the tail comes off this direction. So now if I draw it in, there you have Ursa Major. So Ursa Major, Ursa Minor, the Great Bear, and Little Bear are their formal names. And if we used a lot of imagination, here are those bears there in the night sky. Now, if you've ever seen bears, you probably know bears have short, stubby tails. Well, there are numerous stories and legends about how these bears ended up in the sky. Most of them involve them being grabbed by their short, stubby tails, swung around, their tails being stretched out, and then being released into the night sky, which is why we see them with the long tails there. But whether you prefer the Great Bear and Little Bear or the Big Dipper and Little Dipper, these 2 groups of stars are visible year-round here in Maine. So any time of the year, you can go and look for them. They'll be in slightly different positions in the northern sky. Right now, for instance, the Dipper is high overhead. In the fall season, he will look like he's walking right on the horizon, to give you an idea. So again, you're going to see sort of everything will appear to rotate around that North Star, which is going to stay stationary. That's why people think, often think of it as being very important. Also, by measuring the distance above the horizon to the North Star, you can determine your latitude. And there's a real simple way to do that. If you were to stretch out your arm and make a fist, I know you can't see that so much. A fist at arm's length from the top to the bottom of your fist measures roughly 10 degrees in the sky. And if you measure how high the North Star is above the horizon, it'll give you roughly your latitude. Here in Orono, we're about 4.5 fists because we're about 44, close to 45 degrees north. All right. Well, I'm going to take down those dippers. And I'm going to rotate us around again a little bit. Talked about the Mars and the moon here. And I'm going to head all the way around to the south. So the northern portion of the sky, we see the same things sort of year-round in the north in slightly different positions, the Big Dipper, the Little Dipper, what have you. But right now, we're officially in the season of springtime. And so now I'm facing south. You'll see that Big Dipper just barely there at the edge of my field here. The Big Dipper is almost directly overhead at this time of year, actually, so here in Maine. But the Big Dipper will help us find the spring constellations, because officially right now we're in spring. And we're going to start with that Big Dipper and do something called star hopping. If you imagine these 4 stars, the 4 stars in the bowl of the Dipper, being like a bow, and you pull your arrow back and you let it fly, it would land in the back of this creature right through here. There's sort of a backwards question mark. That is the head and mane, a rectangle that forms the body, and a single star right there marking the tail. I'm going to grab that single star, which is called Denobula, and I'm going to draw in this group. To me, I always see it looking like a mouse with a curly Q tail, but the ancient Greeks, who had very vivid imaginations, saw it as Leo, who supposedly fought a battle with Hercules. And, you know, this lion wandered into a village. It was scaring children, and Hercules started to battle it, but its skin was too tough to be pierced by spear or sword, so he strangled the beast and tossed it into the sky. It was one of his many labors, but Leo the lion. To me, again, I see it as a mouse, but some folks might see it as a lion there in the night sky. But Leo, that majestic lion there. And again, use the Big Dipper to sort of draw, you know, pull back that arrow and fire it into the back of Leo the lion, if you will. Now, tonight, if you happen to find Leo, and you remember where the moon and Mars are now, again, we've moved the moon ahead a couple days here, so the moon back where it really should be. There's the moon. But once it gets completely dark, the moon almost set there. But if you remember the moon and Mars, and here we have Leo out here, all right? If you look for these 2 stars, which are going to be above Mars tonight, those are the Gemini twins, Castor and Pollux. Castor has kind of a long, thin body with short, stubby legs. Pollux a short body with longer legs, sort of through there. Draw in those Gemini twins. There's the Gemini twins. I'm going to draw in Leo here for you too. If you imagine coming from Regulus, which marks the heart of Leo and is a relatively bright star, and head directly over to these Gemini twins, and you come basically bisect that line from Regulus to these are Castor and Pollux, the Gemini twins. Right in the middle of them, you are in this area right through here, there's a constellation called Cancer the Crab. Now, I'm not really curious about the crab so much. It's really faint. But if you have a pair of binoculars, even with your unaided eye, if you're in dark enough skies, you're going to notice a little hazy spot of light there. And that's actually an open cluster called the Beehive Cluster, or Praesepe. So if you have a pair of binoculars, or find Leo, find that those Gemini twins, go halfway in between and bisect that line, and then you would find this open cluster, a couple hundred stars there in, again, Cancer the Crab. So it's a really pretty group in a pair of binoculars, if you will. All right, well, let me come back around here to the south once again. Go out here just a little bit more. Coming back to that Dipper, we can use the handle. And this time, if we trace a line along the bend of the handle, mathematicians would say that's part of a circle or an arc. We can arc over to a bright star called Arcturus. Arcturus is in a constellation called Boötes, the herdsman or the bear chaser. Now, to me, I always see sort of a kite shape here in the nighttime sky, or maybe an ice cream cone with a scoop of ice cream and a little smiley off to the side here. You can choose whichever one you prefer, but Boötes, the herdsman or the bear chaser, oops, there he is. A little smile off to the side is actually Corona Borealis, the northern crown right there. But Boötes is supposed to be a bear chaser, and he is supposed to be chasing that bear away from his flocks of sheep there in the night sky, if you remember the great bear there. So he's chasing them away in the night sky. Now, that bright star called Arcturus is a bright orange star that you'll see in the nighttime sky. And Arcturus is also known by another name, Hokulea, star of gladness or star of joy. It's Hawaii's zenith star. I worked out in Hawaii for a while. That star would be directly overhead at certain times of the year, so they used it for navigation. It's also the name of their famed voyaging canoe, the Hokulea, which recreated some of the Polynesian voyages from Hawaii down to, of course, Rapa Nui, and then down to Aotearoa, or New Zealand as well. Well, after arcing to Arcturus, you can spike down to Spica. Spica is in the constellation of Virgo, and Virgo, zoom in here a little bit, Virgo sort of looks like a letter Y-shaped group of stars. Spica is sort of a grain of wheat. Here's her head up here, the other arm this way. That's the arm that's holding Spica, and then she has a long flowing gown. There is Virgo. Farmers in Northern Europe in ancient times used the star Spica to know when to plant and harvest their crops. When Spica would have what we call a heliacal rising, that means it rises as the sun is setting, exactly opposite, it was time to plant. And that takes place towards the middle to end of April. And when it would set with the sun, towards the beginning of October, it was time to harvest. And that's why Virgo became known as the goddess or maiden of fertility. And she's up all through really the main growing season, if you will, and then she descends into the underworld. And supposedly there's lots of stories about her being sort of captured by Hades, the god of the underworld, or Pluto as we sometimes know him, and him carrying her off into that area, if you will. All right. Well, after arcing to Arcturus and spiking to Spica, you can continue on. There's a little tiny faint group of stars here in the night sky called Corvus the Crow. And it sort of looks like this little trapezoid figure there just beneath Virgo. I mentioned it just because it will sort of stick out there in the night sky, and people often ask me about it. How they came up with a crow out of that group is hard to say, but again, it's supposed to be a crow that's just right underneath Virgo there in the nighttime sky. All right. Well, turn those off for a moment. Rotate around here a little bit more to the east. Now, in the eastern sky, and again, this is the sky right around, almost nearly 10 o'clock, just a few minutes before, but you're going to notice a couple bright stars coming up over in the east. And I'm going to move time forward just a little bit more, because I want to get you to see all of these. There we are. I'll stop right around here. This is about midnight to give you an idea. And by midnight, over in the eastern sky, you're going to see three very bright stars. Their names are Vega, Deneb, and Altair. And they form a group known as the Summer Triangle. Each bright star marks its own constellation. Vega is the brightest in a group called Lyra the Harp. If we zoom in a little bit, it looks like a parallelogram of stars with a triangle attached to it. It's supposed to be a handheld harp, or an instrument the ancient Greeks called a lyre. Deneb marks the tail of a swan known as Cygnus, whose body, neck, and head come all the way down here to Albireo. One wing up on this side, the other wing over there. It's also been called the Northern Cross because of its cross shape there. And Altair marks up part of the body of Aquila the Eagle, a diamond-shaped group of stars that is supposed to be a majestic eagle there in the nighttime sky. And again, with lots of imagination, here is that harp, the swan, and the eagle there. Well, constellations are that. They're imaginary pictures. You do need lots of imagination to see them. It does require some practice, but what the nice thing is, you'll see the same constellations at the same time of year every year. So, we always see certain ones in spring and certain ones in summer. So that's one of the really nice things about those constellations. Now, if you've been looking kind of carefully here, you might notice there's a little bit of a hazy band here across the sky right now by midnight. And that hazy band actually is our Milky Way. And the best time to see the Milky Way here in Maine is sort of late spring, early summer. because in the summer season, you're going to be looking in towards the center of the Milky Way galaxy, which is right down in this area here. There's another star over here called Antares. It marks the heart of a scorpion. Here's the head of the scorpion, and Antares marks the heart. The tail comes all the way down below the horizon. You'll have to stay up later to see the tail, or into the early morning hours. But again, this is Scorpius the scorpion, who fought a battle with Orion, which Orion you would have seen in the winter season. Orion basically, right now you might see the top star or two of it as setting as we at sunset. But again, there is that scorpion, and right off the tail of the scorpion is where we have the center of the Milky Way galaxy. So again, in summers, when you're going to have a really beautiful view of that Milky Way sort of stretched across your nighttime sky, especially if you have a nice dark sky location. So, all righty. Well, we've looked at some of those. Couple other things to mention. If you do have a pair of binoculars and you do stay up until you can see Scorpius coming up over there in the nighttime sky, right off from the scorpion a little bit, there is a variety of, this area of the Milky Way has a variety of deep sky objects. So one of them coming up right here is called the Lagoon Nebula. It's a cloud of gas and dust that with binoculars, if you zoom in on, you would see it as a nebula. It's a place where new stars are forming. With a telescope, you could also find the Trifid Nebula up here. That will require a telescope, though it's a little bit fainter. But that Lagoon Nebula, pretty bright. And there's some star clouds here in the Milky Way. If you look along the Milky Way, there's lots of really beautiful star clouds that you can spot inside of it along that way. So that's a really great place to also start poking around with binoculars. And binoculars, I tell folks, really, 7 by 50s or 10 by 50s are really good for astronomy, because 50 is the diameter, and that gives you a broad diameter. If you can do that versus 7 by 35s or 10 by 35s, which have a smaller field of view, you'll have a much better view of the sky. Well, I know we don't have too much time left, but I'm going to face you towards the east now. And I'm going to keep going here into the early morning hours. And for those of you who either really like to stay up super late or you like to get up early in the morning, here we are. I'll go a little bit farther. Here we are around 3:30. This is just a bit before morning twilight. And at that time in the east-southeast, you're going to get Jupiter and Saturn are going to rise. So Jupiter is the fourth brightest thing we see in our sky after the sun, the moon, the planet Venus, as I mentioned. So it's going to be really hard to miss in the morning sky. With binoculars, you can easily spot the moons Galileo discovered back in 1609. If we zoom in here, we can do that. Need to make sure I'm paused because our field of view will move on me otherwise. But here you can see again Io, Ganymede, Callisto, and Europa. These are moons of Jupiter. So with binoculars, they would basically, Jupiter would appear as a bright dot, and they would appear as little pinpoints, something like that. Let me see if I can turn off the names. There you go. So that's sort of what it would look like through binoculars, where you can see those little pinpoints there. And with a small telescope, you could see some of the cloud bands, possibly something like this, where you can see some of the cloud bands. Bigger telescope, you might get the great red spot. You need a telescope about 8 inches in diameter to see the great red spot or so. Now, pulling out farther, we also, of course, saw Saturn there. Saturn, you will need a telescope at least 2 inches in diameter to see its lovely rings. Saturn right now is in a group of the sky called Capricornus the sea goat, which to me looks more like a boomerang shape. But the ancient Greeks, of course, saw this as a half fish, half goat creature. I'm sure you're all seeing that, but me, I just see a boomerang shape. It's pretty hard to make something that's half goat or half fish out of that little boomerang shape there in the night sky, but that's what the Greeks imagined. All right. Well, Saturn, again, you would need a telescope at least 2 inches in diameter to see its lovely rings. The rings of Saturn are made of chunks of ice that range in size from specks of dust up to about the size of small cars or so. And the rings of Saturn themselves, if you were to place them between Earth and the Moon, would stretch almost from the Earth to the Moon. Distance from the Earth to the Moon, about 239,000 miles. These are a little over 200,000 miles across. So again, Saturn and Jupiter, both giant planets by comparison. All right, well, those are a few things that you can see in the morning sky and the evening sky. Going to do one last thing here because I know I'm running close here, but back to my PowerPoint for a moment here once again. All right, hopefully you're seeing that. So I mentioned before that Katahdin Woods and Water, that there was an international dark sky site or preserve that was designated here in Maine, and that happens to be Katahdin Woods and Water National Monument. In May of 2020, it was designated as a dark sky site or dark sky preserve. So this is an area where they're really doing a lot to try to maintain the beauty and wonder of the night sky. And so if you are able to get up there, there's been a Katahdin star party, typically Stars over Katahdin as it's called, usually in October, waiting to see if that will go forward this year given COVID concerns, but we're hoping it will do so. And it's really just a beautiful place there. You see a nice Milky Way shot from that area, of course. Now, you might wonder about dark skies, and I often tell folks that preserving our night sky is exceptionally important, not just for astronomers. So I love the night sky because I like to look at it, but there's a whole variety of reasons that we all need to do our part to try to preserve the night sky. It does hurt our planet in numerous ways, from, of course, issues with wildlife, from sea turtles and other creatures that it creates problems with their navigation. Of course, there's lots of studies that show that blue light harms our health, and in particular, the new types of LED lights, if they're really the 5,000 Kelvin, those are really bad in terms of that amount of blue light. So if you do LEDs, you want to put lights that are like 2,400 Kelvin, which are much softer and much better for us. But light pollution has been known to increase risks of certain health conditions and makes it very challenging for people to sleep if they have lots of lights on. Of course, lights do not equal safety. That's one of my biggest things. People think that having more lights means more safety. Actually, it doesn't. A lot of times if there's too much light, there's glare. And poor outdoor lighting can actually make it more challenging and problematic, if you will. Studies have shown that 85% of the crime happens during daylight hours. It's movies and television and other things that make us think that all the crime happens at night. That is not when most crime happens. It happens during the daytime hours because burglars can see and it's easier for them too. If you really want lights for safety, lights on motion detectors, lights that are properly shielded make a huge difference. And of course, light pollution wastes energy and money, which contributes to climate change. So again, one of those things. Plus, it robs us of the ability to see the night sky. So I urge everyone to do their best to help. It doesn't mean you have to take down all your lights or anything, but if they don't need to be on all night long, maybe have them so they're on a motion detector. Shield them so the light doesn't just go everywhere. But that's really important, again, to preserving our night sky. The other thing I'll mention is I did mention the planetarium is open. We also are doing some online star parties. We have an online astronomy club called the Universe Explorers of Maine. You can learn more at our website, but every Friday night at 8:30 p.m., we use robotic telescopes from the SLU network, and we show you a variety of views through those telescopes of deep sky objects. These are just some of the images. You do have to be a member to attend that. Memberships start at $50 for a year, but it does get you access to these telescopes, and you can take your own pictures to them as well, just by clicking a button. It's really simple. And there is my contact information. We also have a Facebook page, and I will turn it back over to Kathleen and Will for questions and all that.
Thank you so much, Shawn. That was just absolutely fabulous. And that Stellarium site is, wow, I've never I didn't know that existed, so thank you. And for everybody on the call, we will send that link out in the follow-up email this afternoon so that you can explore it yourself and follow our call to action this week, which is just turn off the lights and go outside. So, Shawn's super grateful for all of those resources, and we'll pass them along. Let's ask some questions. Let's see. We were just building on what you just were talking about with the light pollution and the importance of dark skies. How far out of town do we probably need to be to truly get a dark sky stargazing experience? I know it's going to vary according to a million different things, but is there a general sense?
Well, it's always hard to say in terms of a distance. I think the key thing is the farther away you can get from lights, the better off you are. So I live in Bangor, and the skies are, pretty bright there. That being said, compared to a lot of other places, they're not as bad as some places. But yeah, I mean, Maine is, better. But I typically say if I want to get really dark skies from Bangor, I'm driving half hour, 45 minutes minimally to really get decent dark skies. An hour out will give me much better skies, of course, and depending on things. I know Bar Harbor has some really good lighting, ordinances, and they've done that because, of course, they, with Acadia Night, with the Acadia National Forest, and Acadia does some stargazing events. Typically, they have a night sky festival as well, typically in fall. So their skies you might not have to get as far out. Cadillac Mountain's a great place to go stargazing. I must say, if you ever can get up there, that's a really beautiful spot. The skies aren't absolutely dark there, but it's darker than a lot of places. And again, it's being up at altitude gives you some advantages too in terms of
You mentioned the lighting ordinances, and that goes right to what the next question was going to be. How can we make sure that our skies get darker? I really appreciated that list of the ways that light pollution can hurt all of us, but what can we do to protect them?
A big part of it is talking to your local representatives, talking to your city leaders, and asking them to put in lighting ordinances. When I worked out in Hawaii, for instance, Hawaii has very strict lighting ordinances because of the observatories. The Big Island of Hawaii in particular has them because of the Mauna Kea observatories. Arizona also has some really strict lighting ordinances, and there's lots of other places that are starting to do them because they realize that light, while it can be a good thing, can also be a bad thing. If for instance, if your house is next to a big street light and that light is shining in your window, it can create problems with you sleeping at night. And in some countries, that's illegal. For instance, Australia has lighting control laws where that's considered light trespass. You have to be a certain number of, a certain distance away so that, you're not getting that light, but so it really comes down, and it's hard to get it done on a statewide level. It's usually the local ordinances. So I know right now, for instance, there's a couple areas of the state of Maine that are looking into ways to preserve their night sky. Rangeley is looking into it because they're like, hey, because if you do preserve them too, you can get astrotourism. There are people who will come because they can't see. If you're in Boston or New York or places like that, seeing the night sky is almost impossible. You might get a half dozen stars, but you can't see anything. So again, but I would say check out. There's a Dark Sky Maine and the International Dark Sky Association are two great sources for learning about light pollution and how to help combat it.
That's super helpful. So we know maybe we can learn from other ordinances and examples of what we should be pushing our local communities to adopt. So Dark Sky Maine is what you said, and what was the other one? I'm writing them down.
And also the International Dark Sky Association.
Fabulous, thank you. I'm curious about the planetarium there at the Versant Power Astronomy Center. Who is a typical visitor?
We have sort of two main groups of visitors, you might say, the general public, and then, of course, back before the pandemic, K-12 schools. So we do lots of, we used to do lots of school visits. Right now I'm doing online school visits, of course, but hopefully, right now that it's looking like, we'll be able to get, because right now I can only have 11 people in my theater at one time due to COVID constraints. But hopefully as those restrictions become relaxed, we'll be able to get school groups back in. We also serve our undergraduate astronomy classes here, but also undergraduate earth science and environmental science come to us for some special events. We do a variety of other university classes for things. But then we do general public shows, and every month we have a different topic. Our current one this month is Mayan Archaeoastronomy, which takes a look at the way Mayans looked at the sky. All of our shows always include a live tour of the night sky with what's currently up in the, that you can see and things like that as well. And then Sunday afternoons at 2, we have programs geared for families with younger children. So typically, parents with young kids who will come up for those. So, and our full schedule is always on our website, astro.umaine.edu, or you can give us a call here.
Great. I can remember going to more than one planetarium birthday party when my kids were young. So
yep. We do birthday parties, we've done engagement parties, we've done just a whole variety of different events. And we also do a science lecture series. Again, we're waiting to be able to get those back, but we were up until the pandemic. We actually were doing a science lecture series where we were having folks from different sciences, because now that we are digital, we can really visualize a whole variety of sciences. While astronomy is our key strength, we've done everything. Even up the last one we had just before COVID hit was about viruses. And we actually leveraged our computer cluster while we were shut down to do COVID-19 research. So it's really interesting.
Wow, that's really cool. And I'm curious about do you have a sense of the state of astronomy education in Maine? I mean, other than the field trips and the sort of family events, how much is astronomy part of the state curriculum? And I may be asking you something that is far outside of your expertise, so feel free to tell me that too.
Sure. So I can't, in terms of, it varies a lot from area to area. I mean, astronomy is there's certain parts of astronomy that are in what we call the next generation science standards, and some that have been in the Maine state standards over time. Typically all elementary students learn a little bit about, whether it's, phases of the moon, and basic, a little bits about space exploration, the solar system. And then depending when they get to high schools, some high schools will have an astronomy class, but not all do. Sometimes it's lumped in with earth science or things like that. So it sort of depends. But that's very common in most places, and it really does vary from district to district. I know like some districts will have a high school astronomy class, some might just have an earth science class that has a portion of astronomy in it, and things like that. Here at the University of Maine, we have a physics degree with an astronomy minor, but we also do have graduate students in astrophysics as well. So if folks they can pursue a higher degree here if they are interested.
That's great, thank you. You mentioned as part of that lecture series a program on the Mayan sky, and I'm curious about how sort of different cultures have, so much of our night sky is about these myths and these stories, and how consistent are they across cultures, or are they completely different, and what does that mean? What does it tell us?
Oh boy, you could get me into a whole lecture on that by itself, and it would take more than a half hour. So all cultures, one of the things I tell people is, all cultures have looked at the sky over time, and they've used it as a tool to navigate, to tell time, to know when to plant and harvest. Different cultures have different stories and pictures and things of significance, and of course it varies from hemispherically too, because in the southern hemisphere they see different things than we see here in the northern hemisphere. What is interesting is there are a few constellations that seem to have some ties. For instance, the Great Bear was seen as a bear not just by the Greeks and Romans, but also by Native Americans, by Northern Europeans, by just a whole variety of different cultures. And some folks think that that constellation was one of the quote unquote original ones that people first started looking at and may have traversed the land bridge, back when sort of Russia and you know and Canada slash you know Alaska were connected, you know, and things like that. So, but yeah, there's a whole variety of cultural things. Our star names, you know, our constellation names primarily are from Greek and Babylonia today, but our star names are actually Arabic because the Arabs kept astronomy alive during the Dark Ages. So Betelgeuse, for instance, or Betelgeuse, the shoulder of Orion means armpit of the giant one. And star names have lots of really funny names attached to them in some ways because of that, literal translation. But yeah, astronomy really is multicultural, and all people, you know, really have looked up over time and been, you know, both inspired by the sky and used it to tell their stories. So it's yeah, that's one of my passions is cultural astronomy. So it's really cool to see all the different cultures that are involved and how they've used the sky. In the southern hemisphere, they don't always use stars. Sometimes they use dark areas of the sky to make their constellations. So
Interesting.
like the Aboriginal peoples of Australia and some of the Incans use dark patches in the sky versus the stars to make their, you know, pictures in the sky, which is really interesting too.
Yeah, I can see. I'm already thinking we might have to have another conversation about this because I want to know more.
Sure, sure.
We've seen over the course of the last, what, 14 months or so during the pandemic, so many people turning to Maine's natural places and just beautiful resources as a sort of refuge. Have you seen a spike in interest in astronomy, or either those programs you're running or just sort of anecdotal? You know, now that all our socialization is outside, we're sitting around the fire like our ancestors, right?
Right, right. I have seen an increase in interest, and it's been kind of neat to see some of it. Our planetarium, you know, like I said, we can only have 11 people. We normally could have 50, and we've really been, since we reopened last September, we've been almost consistently selling out in advance. I think I have, you know, I might have a few tickets left for the 21st and the 28th, but I know that all the other tickets for this month are already sold out, and I'm already selling some into, you know, to June. Like I said, hopefully I'll be able to get capacity back here soon. But we've had a lot of people calling the planetarium to you know, get information on telescopes or binoculars or how to get started. And I've done a lot of online programs. You know, it's been interesting. I've had online programs, people contacting me from away. I've done online programs for some folks in New York and even in Texas. Go figure. They reached out to me, but they did, and it was kind of fun. So I did some things for them as well. But yeah, there's definitely been, I think, a renewed interest in looking at the night sky and you know, people getting outside and getting back to nature. You know, and also night hikes too. You know, there, you know, sometimes you can go to like a national forest or place like that, or you know, if you have a you know, even a city park that you know, at night sometimes it can be really nice and dark, and you can, you know, also see the night animals, whether it be owls or bats or other night nocturnal animals too. So that can be fun and an added part.
Yes. So is there an astro tourism industry in Maine? Are there campsites that offer power telescopes or anything like that?
I don't know of a formal astrotourism mechanism here in Maine that does that. I do know that you know, like the Dark Sky Preserve right now, Katahdin Woods and Waters is actually looking at putting in, hopefully in the next couple of years, putting in some type of public observatory, possibly. We have an observatory out back. It's been closed since the pandemic, but I'm hoping now that with vaccinations, we'll be able to open that up, because typically what we do is after Friday nights after our shows, we take people out because we can control our lights here at in our parking lot, and we can, you know, take folks out and show them some things through the Clark telescope. But I do know, you know, but there is astrotourism in the sense that, for instance, the Acadian Night Sky Festival every year has been a really big event to draw people in and astronomers from a variety of different areas, and you know, for people to do stargazing at Acadia. Katahdin Woods and Waters has done a stargazing event for several years, and now that'll probably be bigger now that it's a dark sky preserve, and things like that. So you know, I think astrotourism actually is probably an area in the state that's right. There are people who come here to look at the skies, but you know, I think it would be lovely if someone, you know, decided to set up something like an Airbnb type thing or something of that nature that would cater to astronomers. That would be someplace, you know, not necessarily in a town, but someplace out in the middle of, you know, really dark skies. And if they did set up telescopes, they'd probably have a good business.
Yeah, really, especially because some of that gear is um, a little intimidating for the home the home astronomer.
Yeah,
Uh,
it can be.
so yeah, do you have recommendations about, you know, if you are the binoculars that our bird watching friends recommend going to work for the night sky, or is there something
Yeah,
special we should be looking for?
I definitely say that if you have a pair of binoculars at home that you use for bird watching, sporting events, whatever, those are a great way to get started looking at the night sky and seeing a bit more. They also give you a little bit of an idea of what you can expect through telescopes. A lot of people, when they see these really beautiful pictures through a telescope, they think they're going to look through an eyepiece and they're going to see exactly that. And our eyes don't work that way. Of course, when you're looking through a telescope, your eye, you know, processes things immediately. Telescopes, when they take pictures, they're allowing that light to build on a plate or on an electronic chip nowadays. It used to be a plate long back when I started long ago, but on an electronic chip, and that light will build. And you know, if I tell folks, for instance, if you stare at the wall, you're not going to see any more detail. But if a camera stares at the wall over time, it will gather more detail and more fine, you know, bits because of the light collecting and building. So I tell folks binoculars really give you an idea of a little bit of what to expect. Telescopes will let you see more, don't get me wrong, particularly with the planets and the moon. And with some nebulas and galaxies, you'll see a little bit there, but it's not going to be like the really stunning, you know, pictures. Um, but binoculars are a great place to get started. I also recommend Dobsonian telescopes for those who just want to look at the sky. They're very easy to use, point and shoot. If you want to do photography, then you need the equatorial mount. Then it becomes more complicated, much more expensive, of course. But you know, if folks have questions about that, have them, you know, feel free to reach out because that's a long conversation. But
Okay.
happy
Yeah,
to happy to guide folks through that. That's one of the things we do here is try to help people get started.
that's really good to know, because one of the questions was about what kind of camera does it was used to get that incredible picture of the Milky Way and Katahdin, and that it might be a little bit more complicated than just a
Yeah,
go
yeah.
get this one.
It's time lapse photography, and there's some other things that go into it. So yeah, it's a bit of work. Yep.
One of the things that I find really arresting about looking at the night sky is this element of time elapsing that we're seeing. Are we looking at stars that don't exist anymore?
Probably not that don't exist anymore, but we do know. So one of the things is when we look at the sky, we're looking back in time. When you see a sunrise or a sunset, you see where the sun was 8.5 minutes ago, because that's how long it takes light to reach us from the sun. You know, and when you look at the nearest star to us, which is not visible here, but like Alpha Centauri, which is 4 light years away, you're seeing where that's, you know, the light that traveled from that star 4 years to get here. All right. And, you know, and most of the stars we see in the night sky are anywhere from, you know, a few light years all the way to a few thousand light years away. You know, 3 or 4 thousand light years beyond that, you know, it really blurs and you need telescopes and things like that. The thing is, stars tend to last for millions or billions of years. So, you know, you know, we probably, even though it's taking, you know, that light to reach us a long time, we don't necessarily know they're not there. Now, it could be. I mean, there are some stars like Betelgeuse, which probably at some point is going to go supernova. When it does so, it's 450 light years away. We won't know about it for 450 years. So if it went supernova yesterday, we wouldn't know for 450 years, you know, that it went supernova kind of thing. But yeah, when we look that's one of the things in astronomy, all information is old. The farther away it is, the further back you're looking. So it is kind of a time machine in some regards. Unfortunately, it's only one direction.
And this is why we feel small when we look up at the sky, right? That's a big thing to wrap your head around.
Definitely.
Uh, you mentioned a couple of ways to get star charts. Where's the best place to get one?
So you can find free ones online at heavens-above.com is a great site. You can also find planispheres. We have them here at the planetarium. They're like $6. They're really reasonable. But yeah, Heavens Above is you can create your own star charts, print them out, things like that if you want. The Planisphere is a device that you can just sort of dial in the date and time, and it will show you where the stars are. Planets are going to always change over time because they move independently of the stars. But as you get used to looking at the night sky, you'll get used to recognize them quite easily.
I have a feeling that we're all going to be out looking at the night sky as much as we possibly can in the next couple of months. But are there any dates that we should mark on our calendars for meteor showers, really dramatic evenings? What should we plan for?
Yeah, there's a lunar eclipse coming up at the end of this month. However, it's not going to be visible for us, unfortunately. So we won't have a chance to see that. However, a couple dates, big things coming up this summer. Of course, there's always the Perseid meteor shower every August. There's also a solar eclipse coming up later this year in June. But again, it's not from our area. It's going to set in sunrise, so we're really not going to see. We might see just a tiny portion of a partial phase of that, but we're not placed well. The big thing to put on people's calendar, however, is April 8th of 2024, because then we have a total solar eclipse passing here through Maine. The last time that happened, I believe it was either 61 or 63. I'd have to double check the dates off the top of my head when it passed through sort of over Acadia. But this one is going to be passing through sort of the Baxter State Park area. Again, we will get totality for the first time since the 60s here in the state of Maine. So that's definitely, now April's not always the best for weather, so fingers crossed, but we'll be gearing up for that and doing lots of programming before that to get folks ready. But again, yeah, that's a really big event to be looking for coming up.
I'll say, and probably going to inspire some of that astrotourism we were talking about. I bet we'll have a few visitors.
Yep, I think so.
Shawn, thank you so much. You have just shared so much good information and so much inspiration, and I am really grateful. Thanks to all of you for joining today. We will get as many of those links that Shawn mentioned as possible into that afternoon email and get those to you so you can use them this weekend. Next week, we will be back in this space for the final program in our series of deep dives into the legislative priorities of Maine's Environmental Priorities Coalition. We will be learning a little bit about sea level rise and some of the efforts to prepare for those impacts. We'll have Commissioner of Maine's DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, Melanie Loisum, Representative Lydia Bloom, and Nick Batista from the Island Institute to walk us through efforts to analyze and prepare for the impacts of sea level rise. I hope you're all able to join us, but first, have a wonderful weekend and get out there and enjoy the night sky. Thanks so much, Shawn. Thanks, everybody.